biggest difference was in who did the typesetting. There existed a whole band of very skilled men and women, the compositors.
You would ring the typesetter, you would name your typeface, you would read the text over, and you would get it back. So the telephone in those days was really vital, a really important designer's tool. You couldn't exist without it.
Many a time, I would talk to the typesetter, and I'd say, okay, it's 5 o'clock, okay, but I need this typeset sheet tomorrow. And he said, well, how soon can you get it to us? And I said, I'm speccing it right now.
I don't think people today realize how mathematical and detailed the whole construction of pages was, and still is. It's just done behind the scenes for you automatically. This is a copy of Graphics Master, which was sort of a Bible of the cold type era. You really couldn't see what you were going to get, and you had to specify things way in advance. So you needed a lot of references in order to visualize what you wanted. This is a copy-fitting wheel. You'd actually count the characters in your manuscript, and depending on the line length you wanted and the typeface size, you could determine how much copy would fill up a given space.
If you had an hour to spec raw text, I'm talking like this, right? From this generic, maybe Times Roman at the time, or even, Helvetica, there was a lot of design thinking already at that initial stage. Your decisions had to be arrived at quickly to meet the schedule of another vendor. I'm just going to scramble and send it to you by the end of the day. And that's what would happen.
The way it would work would be that the designer or the creative director would come up with an idea. First thing that was generated was the copy. That would get typed up on a typewriter, and that would be sent to the designer. And the designer would start sketching out ideas, how they saw the layout. They would narrow that down and start doing more refined comps. All of the type had to be specified. Needed to figure out what the font size was, what the type style was, leading, etc. All of that information would go to the type compositor, and that person would retype into a photo composition machine. The output of that would be type galleys. There would be these long strips of paper that would have columns of text in it. Meanwhile, other parts of the layout would be developed, such as photography, lettering, or illustration. Once those came into the production artist's desk, they would need to figure out what the size was, where the cropping was. Once they figured out the percentage or the size of the illustration or the lettering or the photos, they would shoot that on a photostat camera to the actual size that it would be used in the layout. At this point, all of the elements, the photography, the type, the illustration, the lettering, all needed to come and be pasted up onto the mechanical. Once the mechanical was done, it would be sent to the printer. In the pre-press room, they would shoot the mechanical on a large format camera, and they would make negatives out of it. At this point, the FPO photos were replaced with the actual photos that would be used in the printing process. All of these negatives would be stripped together on a large sheet of orange paper. The image at that point was transferred onto a metal plate, which was then used for the printing process.
when we spoke ahead of this talk, because education is so important to you, I said, is there anything in particular that you want to discuss? And you said the only one thing that I want is to be able to, if anyone wants to know about how you get into all of this and what sort of advice you would give to people. I think that, I thought that was really nice that was something you wanted to talk about.
So first thing is how to get into, so some question that comes up often is like, I'm interested in this work, how do I get into it? And the thing that I would say is, the best thing to know is that there are lots of tools around these projects. The community around the work that you're seeing here is really, really generous. There are open source tools. So for example, I mentioned Open Frameworks, which is a tool I helped create, but also P5.js is a JavaScript framework. It's based on processing. But it's not just the tools. Those tools are, in fact, communities, that there are actually really great communities of people behind the tools that are making work, sharing work, publishing code, sharing ideas, answering questions, asking questions. And the one thing that I always ask students to do, if you're interested in this field or interested in these tools, is maybe get out of your comfort zone and ask a question. Like jump on a forum, jump on a mailing list, take a workshop, and start. It's really intimidating to ask questions at first, but the people that I found in this communities are so warm and non-judgmental, and especially with beginners, really friendly, really kind of, in a way, it's free software, but you pay with time. And the way you pay with time is in asking questions, answering questions, getting involved in community. And so I would say one great way to get started with this is just try different tools out, ask questions, become part of the community, because it will take weeks. Like you start asking questions and like within weeks you'll be answering questions. Like it's really, I see it happen all the time. And then in terms of advice for students, I would say the most important words you can know are yes and no. That actually, like, it's really challenging when you're getting started, knowing what to say yes to, knowing what to say no to. And I think it's really important to understand those words and what those words feel like, and actually what saying no is a way of saying yes. Like when you say no, it's setting boundaries or conditions for how you want to work, and your no's lead to yeses. And I've found like that's one piece of advice that I've always given students. And then the second one is that I teach this class. So I was in Boston, 3 days ago, teaching this class called Recreating the Past. Every week I come in, I will give a lecture about John Whitney or Ken Knowlton or Lillian Schwartz or Vera Molnar, and the students recreate the work. And I always start the class with the same lecture. And the lecture is talking about like why is it important to recreate work from the past. And there's a book that I reference in the lecture called The Art of Computer Designing by a Japanese designer named Osamu Sato. It's a book from the 90s. It's about how to use the computer to make art. And I love this book. It's wild, it's super weird. And he's thanking people at the end of the book. And he said, I would like to thank my favorites, Futurism, Avant-Garde Bauhaus, whose brilliant typefaces in many ways have shaped my own mind. If the artists were alive now to work with computers, I'm certain they would discover new artistic possibilities. The work of past ages accumulates and is remade again. And I think that last sentence is super important. The work of past ages accumulates and is remade again. I think there's something really profound there, which is, for students in particular, the work of the past is there for you to recreate. It's both a gift and an obligation. It's a gift to know that you can have a conversation with these artists, that you can get to know them, that you can make work in dialogue with them, that you can recreate work and learn by seeing the world how they see it. But also it's kind of your job. Like it's your obligation, it's your job as a student to recreate the work, but recreate it with today's voice, with today's tools, with today's intentions. So that sentence is super important, I think.